Is that a 1 hour video I see? Why would you watch a 1 hour video on relics? I don't know, you decide what you do with your time. However, the reason I made this 1 hour video is because I feel like this is a video that needs to be made. And as a viewer, I don't like having to search 3 or 4 videos to get the whole picture on one topic. Essentially, this is everything you need to know about relics in one video. This video is mainly made with mid and endgame players in mind, so if you're a new player, feel free to skip to this timestamp. The information there will be directly applicable to you right now. Okay, so how do you roll god pieces? I think that's the question everyone wants to know. How do you get the perfect relic? We will get to that, but before that, I think it's very important to first establish what even is a good relic, because this is different for every single character. However, throughout the years, players have devised methods of kind of quantifying the quality of relics. I don't know where it started, but I first learned of it in Genshin. There's this thing called CV, crit value, where it's basically the crit rate times 2 plus the crit damage of a character. This is the formula that's used to judge most damage dealing characters in games like Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail, because without overcomplicating it, crit is the highest damage increase substat you can roll for damage dealing characters, because most of them can crit, and the more often they crit, the harder they crit, the more damage they do. And for the longest time, I was guilty of this too. This would be like the end all be all stat for judging how good a character is. I would literally roll what I would look at now as bad pieces in, for example, Genshin Impact, just because it had crit rate and crit damage on it. And I would even use those pieces even if the substats didn't roll multiple times into crit rate or crit damage, over another piece that I would look at now and say is better, but just because the other piece had crit, I would use it. A lot of people overvalue crit value, myself included. And I think that especially in a game like Honkai Star Rail, where the build of supports and like characters like DOT characters exist that don't even really scale off crit, it is not all just about crit anymore. And so I think a more comprehensive way to look at what makes a piece good, even though it is all very subjective and it depends on your character and your account and what setup you're running, a more objective way is to look at the amount of useful substats a character has on their pieces. Basically, the amount of useful substats a relic piece has for a character, the better that piece is. Okay, so let's look at Jing Liu, who is a damage dealer. Her whole point is to do as much damage as possible. And she does more damage the more attack she has. That's the primary stat her skills scale off. If you go over here and read, it would say you deals ice damage equal to 200% of Jing Liu's attack. That's how you know she scales off attack. Whereas a character like Fu Xuan scales off HP. So it's just a small thing, but important to note. That means any attack stat Jing Liu has is good. So she would want a lot of attack, and she would want a lot of crit rate and crit damage, because she's a traditional DPS that does rely on just pure damage numbers, not someone like Kafka who does DOT. So useful stats for her would be automatically attack percent, because that's the base thing the damage is based off, and then crit rate, and then crit damage. Crit damage, as you know, to do more damage when your attacks crit, and crit rate to increase the frequency of your attacks critting. And crits basically just mean critical strikes. Basically a stronger form of attack if you're not familiar with the lingo. And finally, what is important basically on every character, universally, is speed. And speed is tricky because how much speed is good really depends on the content you're fighting. A lot of content you don't even require that much speed, and it's hard to quantify. However, for stuff like Memory of Chaos and Pure Fiction, you can hit specific speed, they call it breakpoints, where if you reach those amounts of speed, you can have a certain amount of turns in the limited amount of cycles. For example, a popular one is 134 speed, where it enables you to get 2 turns within the first cycle of Memory of Chaos. And I try to hit that specific breakpoint with my Jing Liu. That's why you see that she's on a 139 speed over here. Ideally, she would be 135 speed actually, because of a strategy I am using Bronya to help do. However, my best combination of relics for my Jing Liu has her at 139 speed. So that's that, and that's fine. Okay, so knowing that Jing Liu wants attack, speed, crit rate, and crit damage, let's look at her relics. So this piece is perfect because it has all useful roles. And at first glance, this other piece here may seem inferior to the previous one because it has flat HP on it, which is not really a beneficial stat for Jingliu, seeing as how she's trying to maximize her damage. Sure, there is value where it makes her tankier, but it is just an inefficient stat to roll because the whole point of Jingliu existing is to do more damage to the enemy. Whereas a character like Fu Xuan's whole purpose is to protect your team. So for example, getting a crit rate and crit damage on Fu Xuan is less beneficial than getting crit rate and crit damage on Jingliu for that reason. So this piece might seem inferior to the other one because this other piece here has speed and this one doesn't. However, we will go into why, but these pieces are pretty much identical in strength. But we will talk more about that later. And that's to do with the specific roles themselves. And then a piece like this is inferior to the previous two pieces, definitely, because it only has 2 of the 4 desirable stats we want. We only have attack and crit rate over here. Okay, now that we have sort of established that, let's go one layer deeper and actually talk some numbers. Don't worry, it's very, very simple numbers. We're only going to count. And we're only going to count to 9. To explain what I mean by that, let's look at this relic that I currently have equipped on my Fu Xuan. Now the reason I'm showing this piece is because I want you to focus on the little numbers beside the relics. So the game doesn't really explain what this is, but if you sort of played enough and rolled enough relics or paid attention, you might theorize, and it's pretty straightforward, that the number beside the stat is the amount of times that stat has been upgraded in the process of rolling this relic. So if you take into account the fact that each relic can go up to level 15 and levels up at increments of 3 levels, we get a maximum times it can be upgraded by 5. So the fact that you can have 4 base relic stats when you first get the relic, and the fact that you can roll it 5 times on top of that, makes the theoretical ceiling for the amount of effective substats you have on a piece 9. However, that's not for all pieces. As you can see here, this relic is plus 15 but only has 4 total stat upgrades compared to the 5 that's on this Fu Xuan piece. The reason being, that relic started off as a 3-liner relic like this one. So if you start off with 3 stats and you can have 5 upgrades on top of that, the max is theoretically 8. So that's one of the reasons that 4-liner relics, basically relics that have 4 stats at plus 0, are more valuable because effectively you get 1 more substat value out of that relic inherently. So at plus 0, some relics are already inherently stronger than others. Regardless of what the relic substats themselves actually are, the fact that there's 3-liner starts and 4-liner starts just means that some are just straight up better at the start. All of that is to say that the more useful substat rolls there are in a relic, the better that relic is. With 9 being the theoretical best relic you can possibly roll. So this piece we're looking at right now is basically the best you can possibly hope for, because it has 9 substats, and all these 9 substats are basically the best substats you can hope for on a Fu Xuan piece. And finally, to go back to the headpiece and glove here, with our newly acquired knowledge, we can see that this piece has 8 effective substat rolls. Every substat it rolled was a good substat, but it was a 3-liner start, limiting its max potential. It is still super good. However, we now also know that this piece has 8 useful substat rolls, and could have had the potential to be 9 if the flat HP was, for example, speed. The glove is actually just as strong as the headpiece. And final thing, just a quick thing, useful stats are generally more important for DPSs, so damage dealing characters like your carries as opposed to your supports. Because supports just need to stay alive and most of their value is in their traces alone, whereas for the damage dealers, they really want those additional damaging stats to boost their damage. Whereas the potency of a support cannot really be boosted by relic substats per se. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, with you hopefully understanding it, my bad if you didn't, I take full responsibility. You probably want to know, okay, well, how do I know what useful substats are for my character? Well, this is where research comes in, and I don't want to be that one guy that tells you to research and watch YouTube guides, but I am that one guy, so that's unfortunate. But fortunately, I'm also that one guy that will tell you that you can actually do this research in-game. You don't actually have to go to YouTube. I mean, YouTube is quite comprehensive and it will give you a lot of details behind why you should run certain builds or why certain team pairings and stuff like that are good. But purely for relics, if all you want to know is what set to run, there's actually a function in-game that shows you what the most commonly ran relic sets are for every single character. This might not mean it's their best set, but the idea is if it works for most people, it should work for you. All you have to do is click into a relic page and then go to the top right where it says recommended. Just click that and it will let you know what the most commonly used set for your character is. Although that doesn't mean you have to use the top set. If you have noticed, my Clara is actually running the third most used option, which is the 4-piece Longevous Disciple set. And there are many reasons for this. I think this Relic Cavern is just much more efficient power-wise to farm. And on top of that, Clara really struggles with getting a good crit ratio or getting a lot of crit stats. So in a lot of situations, this set, giving the crit rate that it does, really helps with Clara's consistency and actually just could be a better option overall. I heard some content creators even say that this is Clara's best in slot. Not to say that the 4-piece Streetwise boxing set is bad though. It probably is still the best set objectively if you look at it in a vacuum to put on Clara. However, to farm that set, you would have to farm the Thief of Shooting Meteor set alongside it because it's in the same cavern, whereas with Longevous Disciple, the Messenger of Traversing Hackerspace set is arguably better than this one. So that's a pretty good second set to have going for you when you're farming this domain. Anyway, just letting you know that this recommended set feature exists in-game. Although I do think the best option might actually be an external website that is made by HoYoverse themselves. HoYo Lab actually released a thing where they made it very easy to look at useful substats. And so this is HoYo Lab. And for those of you who don't know, HoYo Lab is this forum that HoYoverse created themselves. Basically, it's a place where players from all their different games can meet and talk. And also it provides functions and like actually useful features like this one that they recently added, where you basically have a way to look at useful substats on your pieces. And they even add up the total amount of useful substats you have for your characters for you. So for example, here my runmate has 35 and the preferred substats are HP percent, defense, speed, break effect, and effect resistance. So actually this one, I set the preferred substats myself because I want my runmate to be a bit tanky at base. It didn't have HP percent and defense percent set as a useful substat. So yes, you can actually customize what you consider as useful substats for characters on this page itself if you're going for certain builds. But at base, they use the community recommended best builds, which are generally pretty accurate already, to kind of help you visualize the power of your character's relics in a more clear way. I haven't always been a big fan of using external sites for stuff like this, but upon using the HoYo Lab one, I think it's actually very useful. Like especially having so many characters in this game to build and to monitor and to keep track of in terms of what stats are good for them and whatnot. HoYo Lab is actually big lifesaver. You could try it out too. So yeah, do your research. The earlier you do it, the better, because you might really get lucky at the start and you might not be able to identify that these are actually good pieces because you don't know what pieces you're actually looking for. And there's no limit to this. Actually, basically the more you research, the better, because you might realize that many of your characters could be using the same cavern. And so you could then, with that knowledge in mind, prioritize farming, for example, the new Pioneer of Deep Waters cavern over, for example, the follow-up attack cavern because you realize you only have one follow-up attack character, which is Himiko, that you want to build, whereas your Doctor Ratio and your future Acheron will probably want the Pioneer of Deep Water set. So just the more characters you know the build of, the better and the more efficiently you can conduct your farming. Now, with all of that said, assuming you did all your homework, you know exactly what you're looking for, and you're farming the Relic Cavern, and you're getting average luck, probably mostly bad luck, which is normal. And then one day you get what seems like a good relic. The main stat is correct, maybe useful substats as well. How do we look at your inventory and then decide, okay, what do we do with this relic, or what relics do we even roll to begin with? Is this relic even worth rolling? Okay, so this might be a bit tricky to explain because I'm trying to cover as broad a spectrum of players as possible in the end game, because there are different investment levels within the end game as well. You might have players who just reached the end game, maybe they played for 2 months, or people who have been playing for almost a year now, like me. These are two things though that will apply to everyone. Only roll relics with the correct main stat, okay? So if you're farming for Acheron, you know she wants crit rate and crit damage, for example, only roll crit rate and crit damage chess pieces for her, unless you have other characters that you're farming for that require, for example, effect hit rate if you're building a DPS Pella, for example, or something like that. And once again, this is where research is really important. It would help to know these things. There is no point rolling an attack percent main stat piece. There's no point rolling an HP or defense, no matter how good the substats are, no matter what, okay? I think most people do this already, but it's just worth saying. And then secondly, if you ever forget what substats you want, or if you haven't really done much research and you just want to roll your relics because you're addicted, like me, to gambling, a general rule of thumb is that any stat that you have as a main stat, you would really like as a substat. Also, since we're on this topic and I thought about it, just in case you don't know, if you rolled something as a main stat, so for example, this crit damage chess piece, you can't roll crit damage again as a substat on it. Same thing for the attack rope, you can't roll attack percent on the substat. It is just theoretically impossible. It's just coded that way. It is impossible. It will never happen. Same thing for speed boots and whatnot. So in case you're one of the people who are hoping to get both crit rate and crit damage on a chess piece, I'm sorry to be the one to have to break it to you, but now you know. Hopefully you didn't throw away all the crit damage or crit rate main stat pieces with the other rate or damage as the substat. So my condolences if you did though, because I've actually had a lot of people tell me that they didn't know that. Actually, now that I think about it, the game not explaining things and telling you things is probably the reason people like me have to make 30-minute videos. Anyway, only roll pieces that have the correct main stat, and good rule of thumb is that any stat you have as a main stat, you want as a substat. With that in mind, for people who just reached the end game, or for people who are just gearing characters for the first time, and this is especially if you are using the character actively. So for example, if you only have one team, and you're running that team everywhere, and you want to gear one of those members in the team who currently has 4-star relics or pretty bad stuff, all you care about, okay, because you want to get value out of them right away, only go for main stats. So let's say I'm building my Clara, I would only go for a crit rate main stat. I wouldn't care about the substats. As long as there's a crit rate main stat, I would plus 15 it, no matter what. I'll go for attack boots. Don't look at substats. Substats are an afterthought. Just plus 15 it. Attack or physical damage boost orb. I'm running attack orb because I run her run May, by the way. And like attack rope. It's all I'll look at. You just want them off the ground running. If you watched my previous video and you heard the analogy of the leaking house, that's basically the same thing. The earlier you get a character up and running, the more value you get of them over time, basically, right? That's not exactly the reason I use that analogy, but I think it applies here. I think this is especially fine because when you do get a better piece with the correct main stat once again, but better substats, actually useful substats, the Relic EXP isn't really wasted. I mean, some of it is, but you can basically take that old piece and just feed it into the new piece and retain like 80%, I think, of the Relic EXP that piece has. Okay, now we step up a level. So let's say you're someone who already has characters up and running. You just want them to be better. I would say the next real upgrade breakpoint is 42222. If you're confused, I don't blame you. 42222 is basically the amount of useful substat rolls that a single piece has. And we're going in order of how the relics are displayed on the relic screen. So 42222 basically equates to 16 useful relic substats. And once again, you can use HoYoLab to check this. But the reason I said 42222 and not just 16 useful relic substats is because it is much easier to aim for better stats on the headgear and glove instead of the other pieces. Because Unlike the other pieces where there are a bunch of different main stats, you might have realized that yeah, the headpiece and the gloves only have a fixed one, which is HP and attack respectively, meaning that all you need is the correct substat, not the main stat. So for example, you might be building Jingliu, you want an ice damage orb, and you get a orb that has crit rate, crit damage, speed, and attack for substats, but its main stat is fire damage boost. If that was a handpiece, that situation can never happen. It's just not possible. So yeah, 4-2-2-2-2. Honestly, at that point, if you have decently invested traces, a team comp that has good synergy, and you play that team somewhat well, and maybe if your main carry isn't Arlen, you can most probably 36-star MOC. I'm saying this because I've seen people with 4-star accounts, 36-star MOC, or people that don't really use the best relics as well do it. Yes, having god tier relic substats will definitely help you do more damage and probably clear MOC faster. However, there are so many factors going into why you might not be able to 36-star MOC. And relics might not be the sole thing to blame. And you can clear with very minimally invested relics, as long as you meet the minimum requirements for certain characters to run. This is a bit of a tangent, but a very important tangent. What do I mean by this? This is seen in a lot of characters, but mostly characters that need effect hit rate. So these are characters like Pella, whose whole purpose is to land this defense down zone suppression ultimate on the enemy, and she requires effect hit rate for it to be consistent. If the whole character's thing is to land a debuff on the enemy, and your character does not land a debuff on your enemy, then is she useful at all? So this is just an ultra specific example, but Pella needs 67% effect hit rate basically to guarantee your alt debuff lands every time on the enemy. So even if you have terrible substats across the board, but you have just enough substats, or you're running a main stat that gives you the enough amount of effect hit rate, your Pella will be basically performing to her full potential, and any other substats after that is so that she can do maybe a bit of damage or guarantee that she can't really die by investing into HP, effect resistance, and defense substats. However, it is super important that you reach the effect hit rate requirement. Same goes for Welt. A lot of his damage dealing capabilities and a lot of his utility comes from him landing debuffs. He needs around 43% to guarantee his debuffs lands. Same goes for March's Freeze, Black Swan's DOT, which is 120%, so on and so on. And you might think this just applies to debuffing characters, nihility units, but no, you would want to invest into crit stats. However, are crit stats worth investing into if you never crit? Okay, that sounds like a weird thing to say, but what I'm essentially saying is she has to crit for it to work out. Even if you have 200% crit damage on Herta, which is a lot, but you only have 30% crit rate, your Herta might not be doing that well because all of that crit damage stat, when you don't crit, is just wasted. So a good way to prevent this from happening is to probably run a crit rate chess piece, because with the 200 crit damage scenario, you're running a crit damage chess piece definitely. So if you run a crit rate chess piece, instead of 30 crit rate, you will have 62 crit rate, and you would have 138 crit damage instead, which is, yes, you don't crit as hard, but now you actually crit. And being able to crit in the first place is the requirement to get these characters up and running. I would say for most crit DPS in the endgame, a good baseline minimum is like 60 crit rate you want to hit at least before deciding to go high into crit damage. And basically, the closer you are to 100% crit rate, the better. And then after that, you can go full into crit damage because you can't get higher than 100% crit rate because you can't double guarantee something that's already guaranteed. A good thing that helps with these like crit calculations as well, this is not so much the baseline we're talking about now, but just generally for crit, a crit ratio of 1 to 2 is generally very, very beneficial, and is something that you probably heard of because it's such a popular thing in the community. Essentially, for every 1 crit rate, you want 2 crit damage to have the quote-unquote optimal damage output. You want to invest into crit rate and crit damage at the same time, so you won't run into situations where you crit all the time but you hit like wet noodles, or you would hit very hard if you crit, but you just never crit. Although those situations happen with like 95% crit rate as well. I'm sure Zila mains understand what I'm saying. Okay, now moving on to the next breakpoint. So now you know what you're doing, you're having a good time, you might have cleared MOC as well, but you want to clear MOC faster. You just like seeing your characters do more damage maybe. Now you want to get to the next level. So what's this next level? Keep in mind, this is all just very subjective. This is just from me, an endgame player's perspective, as someone who has played Genshin for over 3 years and someone who has played a lot of Honkai Star Rail. This is just my perspective. This is not concrete. This is not math or proven by anything or written in stone anywhere. This is just what I think would be above average and considered strong. This is if you want to start flexing to people, if you want to start posting your builds on HoYoLab, you want to start messaging people on Discord and then not have them message you back being like, yo, dude, why are you flexing? My build is better than yours. You would want 664444. I would say is the point where you can almost maybe start flexing if you want and you're doing above average damage with your character. Same thing, headgear and gloves 6-6 because those are easier to get substats for, and then the rest you just pray you get lucky and do the 4444. Not much to say there, it is just another stat goal to hit. Okay, so now this is how I roll relics. You pretty much can breeze through the game already with 664444. But for me, as someone who's a gambling addict, someone who's self-admittedly a bit of a perfectionist, I aim for 775555, which is effectively 34 useful substat rolls on my characters. And here's why it might not be the best idea for everyone. First of all, I am vertically investing in this account, which means I build less characters, I pull less characters, meaning I don't have to farm for their trace materials, I don't have to farm for their ascension materials, I don't have to farm relics for them as well. So I can hyper focus and do a single relic domain over and over and over again, with diminishing returns of course, to get incremental upgrades on my pieces and eventually get them to the quality that, for example, my Jingliu's pieces are on. And I'll show you her pieces in a bit and actually let you know how long it took me to get them. But I also sacrifice the flexibility in the domains I farm, because to get a good 4-piece set of one set, it takes significantly longer to get those incremental small upgrades towards the end than it would to, for example, even farm good sets, like just average good sets from 2 different domains for different characters. Also, I noticed I've been saying domains a lot. Sorry, old Genshin habit. I mean cavern every time I say that. And as a result, even on top of not being able to pull a lot of characters, which is by choice, you know, I don't even get to build my free doctor ratio is what I'm saying. I chose to build Jingliu and get her close to perfect relics instead of building doctor ratio. The whole patch, when he was around, I just farmed that ice domain pretty much because I wanted my Jingliu to be one of the best. And that's just like a personal thing, right? But as a result, my doctor ratio isn't built at all. No levels, no traces, no relics, even though it would probably have been a smarter decision for my account overall to build him instead, even with average relics. However, I was already clearing MOC very comfortably and didn't really need another DPS urgently, so I decided to build Jingliu. As you can probably tell, I prefer having a character that's close to perfect than having a character that's average built. Once again, that's just me. Beauty of this game is that you can play it how you want, and how you use your resources is all up to you. But yes, as a result of that, my Jingliu has pretty godly relics. What you're looking at is actually a 8. Super lucky with this one. 6. But I did quick guesstimate math and I would say it took a total of 12,000 Trailblaze power, which is roughly 50 days of naturally generating Trailblaze power. Oh, and I just mean the 4-piece set, by the way. The planet ornaments are a whole different story, and I would say easily another 50 days worth of Trailblaze power into that as well. However, once again, this is where doing research helps, because along the way of getting Jingliu, my almost perfect set, I was able to give Herta a bunch of decent pieces as well. My Bronya too, and no win set is not better for Bronya in the 134 speed playstyle. Just because I saw some comment on my account review video that said that. And while farming the planet ornaments for Jingyu, I was able to get a lot of broken keel energy regeneration ropes, which are probably the best support set for supports right now, and a bunch of orbs as well. So I'm not complaining, I'm very happy with it, but do keep in mind that this required planning. I did gravitate towards pulling characters that did use these specific sets as well. Also, yes, at this point I would like to say that all substats are not equal. There are minimum rolls and high rolls in substats as well. So to quickly explain that, when you roll a substat, the value, the number increase that you get has a range, and there are 3 different qualities. There's a low roll, a mid roll, and a high roll. But let's not really worry about that. That is just completely down to luck. And if you're lucky, you get high rolls, but they shouldn't really affect how you roll a piece. And also, not all subsets are equal in the sense that, yes, for example, for Jingyu, it is more beneficial to roll crit damage than it is attack percent. But if you're someone who can tell me that rolling 1 crit damage sub is 1.72 times percent damage increase as opposed to rolling an attack percent substat that's a 1.07% damage increase at the max roll, well, you're probably someone who already knows your stuff. So all I'm trying to say is that yes, there are nuances, and we can talk about this even more in depth for much longer, but I don't think it is really important at the end of the day, honestly, truly. Because I'm at the point of using 12,000 power in this one relic cavern, I still don't have the luxury to be like, yeah, let's just roll crit, let's not roll anything else, let's just roll crit damage, don't give me those attack percent. You attack percent on a piece, throw away. I'm still not at that point. So final thing before we move on to our next section, which is a very exciting, a very cool, very fun, live rolling relic section. It is important to not tunnel vision onto rolling specific relics for a character. I recognize the irony of me saying this after saying how much resin and how much time I've spent farming for Jingyu specifically, and only her. But my whole account is built around this. I only have one limited main DPS, and I went into this game knowing that I was going to commit heavily into one character. I only pulled supports for her, and I only spend my power basically making her as good as I can. However, that might not be the case for you. In fact, it's probably not the case for most people. And if you're one of those people, it is a good once in a while to take a step back. Even I had to do this because I had to build my supports as well, right? I can't 24/7 farm Jingyu relics. It's good to take a step back and be like, okay, you know what? They're good enough for now. Let's raise the floor together. Going back to the leaky roof analogy, this room is pretty much 99% patched up. Let's just go outside and start working on another room to make that room dry as well. We can paint the roof of this room later. Let's just make sure the whole house is leak-free first. Especially with supports, you might actually want to take a step back and farm relics for your supports as well. So maybe they can hit certain speed breakpoints, or their traces are more leveled and are stronger now to indirectly increase the damage of your main DPS. And with less power, you can probably get your main DPS to do more damage if you just raise the floor at the same time. Although, yeah, this goes back to research as well. So it is the reality of things, I guess. Just like the more you know, the better you will do. I don't want to sound too much like a robot, but it is just true. This is just a sort of friendly reminder to remind you that knowing the potential of your characters and how they can work together is better than like chasing new units every time they're released. Because a lot of times we don't even actively choose to consume this content. We might click on a new video because of an appealing thumbnail or something like that because a new unit release. I'm sure when Acheron releases, a lot of people might pull for her because of just some videos people make saying how strong she is. I'm just saying that if you really want to, you don't have to spend Jade. There are ways to learn more about your account and bring up the strength and capability of it without spending any Jade. Because even if you pull Acheron, if you don't play her in the correct teams, if you don't have the correct supports for her, she might not perform as well as people might say that she does. Because keep in mind, all these videos and content creators and people who make these videos know much more than the average player. They are playing these characters optimally in their ideal setups, and I feel a lot of times they assume that people will do that as well. All of this is just once again to say bring your account up as a unit, as a whole company, as an army. Going back to my army general analogy from the previous video, these are your troops, these are your staff members, and it's all up to you to learn about them and to coordinate them. Okay, now to solidify everything that we've talked about, because I feel like this might be a very information dense video and probably a really long one too. Let's do some live relic rolling. Woohoo! Woohoo! Let's go! Yay! Wow, okay, let's do this. As you can see, I already have some pieces locked, and I normally just do this the moment I get the piece, just so I don't accidentally salvage it, and also because I just salvage every piece that I don't have locked. First of all, I lock a lot of pieces that just have speed on them, as you can see. A lot of pieces I lock just because of speed. Because with a lot of characters, you just need certain speed to reach like thresholds for MOC. It's like super tryhard endgame stuff. Speed is hard to get, and you want speed for a lot of characters to do a lot of different setups. So I think speed is very valuable. Okay, let's start off with this piece, where I'll be doing something called checking. And that's basically unlocking the 4th substat. I usually do this with most pieces that have promise. So I'm doing it with this crit rate main stat body one, even though it doesn't have crit damage or attack percent in its substats, because those are the 2 most desirable substats, I think, for a DPS. Although it does have speed, and even if it didn't have speed, I would still check it because of how rare it is to get crit rate or crit damage chest pieces. They're hard to come by. So just a normal +3, because that's the most efficient resource-wise. Okay, over here, I would want crit damage as the next substat roll, because if I'm rolling a crit rate main stat piece, crit damage as a substat will always be beneficial, because once you want one, you want the other, and vice versa. And we get the classic flat HP. So what I'm thinking now is this piece has only 1 chance, 1 in 4 chance every time I roll it to get a good substat. It has a 1 in 4 chance to roll speed every time, and I'll have to invest increasingly more resources into it to see if it actually does that. If this is me farming my first 5-star set and I'm, for example, building Doctor Ratio, I would just +15 this no matter what. Even if it rolled flat HP there, which is definitely not ideal, I would still +15 it just because the main stat of crit rate is just that valuable. You get 32% at level 15, which is a lot. However, for me right now, I'm not urgently in need of this set, so I don't have much incentive to continue leveling this piece because it only has a 1 in 4 chance of hitting a good stat, that being speed. And every time I enhance it even more, it'll get more and more expensive, and essentially if I end up not using this piece will end up being a waste. And even if it rolls the best case scenario, which is rolling the 25% chance every single time, 4 times in a row, because +6, +9, +12, +15, that's 4 times. This piece will have only at a maximum 5 good substats, assuming that we put it on a character that doesn't want HP defense. If I was aiming for like average, like normal medium investment, I could try my luck, because if I get really lucky, this piece could fit the bill of being a pretty averagely decent piece. And that's if you get super lucky, by the way. However, for what I'm aiming for, which is 7555, this seems basically impossible. I don't see a future with this piece. However, I do have spare relics, and this is where it really is up to you. I would, because I believe in the heart of the cards, I believe in RNGesus, whatever it be, there is a chance, so I'm going for it. Just to +6. If it doesn't hit speed at +6, I would stop rolling it, because then there's just no point. It will never be a 9 speed or 10 speed piece ever. Okay, this might look good, but it's the worst thing because the next roll now will cost more. It basically costs more to fail now, but I've already done that, so we can't go back now, right? Surely we can't go back now. Is the game trying to tell me something? Let's do another +3, and there we have it. So, it was bound to happen, but you never know, you can get lucky, and this is what I'm showing you right now, this is a maximum copium, and I'm trying to talk you through my thought process. And the reason I'm convinced that this is fine though is because I can unlock that and then now feed that into another piece. If we can find one, but I do not have luck with this set, so yeah, I'm not leveling any of this. Yeah, this crit damage one, even though it's rare, it's a 4-liner start. It has one good stat in it, so I don't really see myself rolling this one. Although we could try. I'll talk you through this again as if I was in the mindset of a newer player once again, because this can actually turn out to be something usable if you believe it or not. Because I feel a lot of people underestimate attack and flat attack. People just want to see crit. And I've explained this earlier with the crit value thing, myself included, for a lot of times in the past. Okay, so if I was a newer player, I would actually be really happy by this because it's an offensive stat on an offensive set. Even though it's flat attack, which is probably the worst offensive stat. By the way, I didn't talk about this in the video earlier, but flat stats, the stats without a percent next to them, are usually worse than the stats with percent the more you get into the game, because the higher your character's base stats are, so basically the higher your character's level and their light cone level are, the more value you start to get from percentage increases rather than flat increases. But if you're in the early game, I think flat increases are better than percentage increases. But that's like really, really early game. For the sake of saving resources, I won't actually roll this now, but if I was an early game player, this actually is pretty good because there's a 50% chance, essentially, because there are two good stats here, 50% chance that I roll a good stat and I would just max it out, honestly. Doesn't matter, it doesn't have crit rate, because a crit rate piece could come later on and you could then level that one. Because even then, when a crit rate piece does come, it's not even guaranteed that it will roll crit as a substat, right? It might be worse than this piece. Because we talked about useful substats earlier, that crit rate substat piece might have less useful rolls than this piece. Okay, now let's check this piece real quick. And we get break effect. So break effect is not the worst stat because a lot of characters actually want this stat, and it's an offensive stat in the sense that it helps you do a bit more damage. However, this is where knowledge comes into play, and it is good to kind of know what stats your characters want. I can't off the top of my head think of any character that wants break effect on this set, because this set basically is a crit set. It just gives you so much crit, so you would never put this on a character that doesn't want crit, and characters that want crit can run this set. The only character that I can think of that runs break effect and crit is Xue Yi, and Quantum set is just much better for Xue Yi, and I won't run this set even if he has godly substats over a Quantum set, because the Quantum 4-piece set effect is just so good for Xue Yi. Now with that knowledge, and because now I know that effectively this only has one good subset out of 4, I would probably not roll it. This piece on the other hand looks so similar like the other one, right? Except this one has speed, which is better, but it essentially has crit rate and break effect. However, even if this piece didn't have speed, I would roll it at least once or twice, because this piece is a 4-liner start, which means it has more chances to roll crit rate basically. So I basically have higher chance of success here. So even though the chances of me succeeding aren't the highest still, at least they are higher. Yeah, and so that's the risk of rolling pieces like this. You can get lucky early on and defy the odds and just get really lucky, but then, you know, it's still basically 50-50 chance-wise, and yeah, it might catch up to you on plus 12 or plus 15 when you fully invested all your resources already. However, with this piece, if we look at it, there are currently 5 good stat rolls, 5 useful rolls already. So for a boot that is harder to get good substats for than, for example, a glove or a headpiece, because you need the correct main stat first as well, right? I would say that I am down to take this to plus 15, because essentially there's a 50% chance to turn this into a 6 substat piece, which is insanely good already if we go by the metrics of what I've been using in this video. Also, yes, I like manually clicking my relics. I am old school like that. I like to feel like I'm feeding it into the piece myself, if that makes sense. Let's see. That's Relic rolling for you. So, like we have established before, we don't really want break effect, and so this is at the end of the day a 5 useful substat piece, which is honestly pretty good already. However, it is average for what I aim for. And before we end this live rolling session, let's just talk about some of the pieces I locked and why I locked them. So this one here, because it has HP % effect resistance, which is really good for support characters in general, and seeing as this is a supportive set, it's very beneficial. But the nail in the coffin, like the cherry on top, the thing that made me instantly lock it is the fact that it has crit damage. So characters like Sparkle and Bronya like crit damage to increase the potency of their buffs. So if I ever run them on this set, for example, with a character in the future that might scale off break effect like Shuei does, and they want to run this set because of it, then this will be an amazing piece to have. Same goes for this piece. It has 83% effect resistance, which is amazing tanky stats. Crit damage as well for the same reasons I described earlier. And now also break effect, which is the whole thing about this set. So this is a flex piece basically. If it rolls a lot into crit damage, it could go to like Sparkle or Bronya if they ever use this set. Or if it goes into a lot of break effect, it could be a Run Mei piece, which is amazing. Amazing piece. This here is a lesser version of the previous piece. It has crit rate, which automatically means it doesn't really have synergy with characters like Sparkle and Bronya anymore. However, it still has HP, which is nice and tanky, and it also has break effect. The thing with this set is that you really want a lot of break effect if especially you're playing slow run Mei like I am and you just want to stack a lot of break effect. And break effect substat on a break effect set is generally good, so I'm just locking every break effect piece on the set. This piece has defense and speed, which is the main things. I don't think any character that runs the set right now really wants effect hit rate, but speed is really good. It's a really hard stat to get as well. I don't know if there's data behind this, but I think it's harder to roll a speed stat as a substat than a normal stat. Please tell me if I'm wrong, but that's just the feeling I get. So every time I see speed, I just lock it because the more speed pieces you have, the more chances you have of getting good speed pieces. This piece is just super defensive, HP defense effect res, could be used on basically any support. This piece, crit damage effect res. This is on the weaker side of a piece that I might actually end up unlocking, but it has the potential to roll a lot of crit damage, so I'm keeping it. This piece as well, speed and tanky stats. This piece, crit rate and crit damage. I still have the habit of keeping crit rate and crit damage pieces. I don't have the heart to throw them away. So if a character in the future that is kind of a damage dealer that uses this set arrives, I could use it on them, but I don't think that's likely. It's just my crit brain, my Genshin brain preventing me from throwing this away. Same with this one. And for this one, it's kind of the same too. Actually, I don't know why I'm locking it. I guess the crit damage is good, but then like attack %, effect hit rate, I don't know. Yeah, I'm probably gonna unlock it. This piece I'm locking because speed, I just love speed that much, I guess. Attack % is somewhat offensive as well, and effect hit rate. Because this is a debuffing set, a lot of characters that will use this set have debuffs on their own, and most likely will want effect hit rate for those debuffs to land. So even though it doesn't have crit, and you can argue that this is, a crit set, you want crit on the piece, I'm kind of keeping it still because, it might roll good. Because it's also a 4 substat start. I would normally lock this piece actually right here because it has some tanky stats which are good for supports, effect hit rate, which is good for this set, and then crit rate, also good for this set. But I didn't lock it because I have this other piece which basically has the same things, effect hit rate, crit rate, but this one has 15%, so like, why would I ever need the other piece? And this piece over here, I locked because crit rate good for crit set and it has some tanky stats. I'm coping and thinking that maybe in the future, if I want a hybrid support character that wants survivability and still wants to do a bit of damage, kind of like how I'm playing my Pella right now, she might want this piece. But that's coping, probably will not happen. So, and this piece is just bad, this is a damaging set, you want some damage on the substats. This is bad because you want some damage. Although attack % is damage, it has the potential to be much better with things like crit rate and crit damage. And this piece, is just bad too. So as you can see, I don't know if this is considered strict or not. I would say it kind of is. I'm somewhat strict with substats. However, the one thing I'm not strict with substats on is energy recharge ropes because they're just so hard to get and I just make do with whatever. This is the one my Fu Xuan is currently running, a bunch of attack % which she doesn't even use, defense which is kind of okay for her, and then crit rate which is, so it's basically a bad piece, but I still use it. But yeah, I just roll energy regeneration ropes with anything on them and just slap them on characters. That's the live relic rolling session. Hopefully that was insightful. Hopefully you learned something, anything. Moving on. Let's talk about a few things that I didn't manage to naturally fit in the rest of the video. The first one is a resource saving tip to do with when to stop rolling relics. At what point do you consider a relic done? For this, it's kind of important to know what stat line you're aiming for, and that's why we spend so much time talking about like the 442222, which I said right this time, or the 775555, stuff like that, right? Knowing that allows you to predict really early on whether a piece is worth your resources or not. So for example, we're looking at this piece right here, which at first glance looks amazing. It has 3 amazing substat rolls, speed, crit rate, and crit damage. Amazing for this set. However, if we remember, my goal with my pieces are 775555 as the minimum. Looking at this piece and the fact that it's already at +6, we know that it only has 3 more upgrades left in it before it hits 15. So at maximum, best case scenario, it can roll useful substats 3 more times. Combined with the fact that it currently only has 3 useful substats, its max potential is only 6 useful substats, which is amazing depending on where you are in the game, but for me and where I'm aiming, this just doesn't cut it. I know a past me will have definitely leveled this piece and then brought it to +15, and even if everything goes well, I would still look at it and then be somewhat disappointed and try to refarm the piece, try to get a better piece over this one. Well, now that I'm much more aware and using the useful substats method, I can avoid having to sink all those resources into a piece that will have to refarm again in the future. But I have to kindly remind you that this really depends on what you're aiming for, and you can definitely clear this game even with really bad relics or relics with just 1 or 2 useful substats. Getting 7 useful substats on a piece at minimum for me is more like a personal goal, a kind of thing I set to keep me interested and playing the game. It's what I find fun. Even if it at the end of the day is just gambling, you know. This tip will save you a lot of resources, trust me. The next tip has to do with how I got all these inert Salsoto pieces without ever really farming that simulated universe world. And I got them through salvaging. If you're not aware, you can get these relic remains by salvaging 5-star relics. Each one you salvage will grant you 10 relic remains, and you need 100 to craft a 5-star relic from the synthesizer. So effectively, it is 10 5-star relics in order to get a fresh new one. The reason I farm inert Salsoto this way is because the inert Salsoto world is linked to the Belobog of Architects world, which basically no character really wants to use. And if it's their best set to use, for example, on a character like March, she already has so many decent alternatives, and this set isn't super important for her to have. So it just doesn't feel nice to go into a simulated universe world and have a 50% chance of getting something you want without even it guaranteeing to be good. For example, I get a Salsoto piece, but then the Salsoto piece might not be good. And then a 50% chance of no matter what, even if the Belobog piece is amazing, it is an unusable set and an undesirable set for me. Even for Cavern of Corrosions, I did do this, for example, for a set like the Quantum one at the start of the game, because I was so heavily farming for Hunter of Glacial Forest for my Herta and eventually Jingliu. I farmed my Genius of Brilliant Stars by using the synthesizer because I didn't quite want the Guard of Wuthering Snow as well. So yes, you can effectively farm another domain without ever stepping foot into it through salvaging. Since we're on the topic of salvaging, let's talk a bit about whether to salvage into Relic EXP material or Relic remains. So I have heard a lot of opinions online. Through most of the content creators I watch, they do in fact salvage into Relic EXP material, because if you're farming Cavern of Corrosions a lot, you will likely run into a point where you are trying to upgrade relics but you just don't have enough 4-star relics to salvage into EXP material for your 5 stars, and so you have to start salvaging your 5 stars as well. Generally, this is fine to do, and in fact, I see so many people, so many content creators and whatnot doing this as well. It really is up to you. However, me personally, as a certified gambling connoisseur, I only, since the start of the game, only do Relic Remains. And probably one of the reasons I have high standards for rolling 5 stars to begin with is because I want to keep them at +0. If they're not good, I wouldn't roll them at all because I want them to be able to be salvaged into Relic Remains so I can gamble more. For example, I'm doing right now the Salsoto set. So yeah, once again, really it's up to you. But if you're not struggling with having enough Relic EXP at all, I would strongly suggest that you salvage your 5-star relics into Relic Remains because of the reasons I've stated earlier and the benefits that you can get from that. Apart from the fact that you can farm more relics and have more chances to get bad relics, but equally at the same time, more chances to get potentially good relics. Who knows, right? Who knows? So what we just talked about is very min-max endgame stuff. Now let's talk about the complete opposite. Let's address the newer players. If you're someone who is below AR 50 and are watching this video, relics shouldn't be your #1 focus right now. In fact, I think the best way to use your power is to farm traces and just to learn about the other parts of the game first. Relics is something that you can't really farm with max efficiency up until you hit TL level 65. However, you can probably start farming it around TL 60. With traces and other forms of power consuming activities, you can farm with max efficiency much earlier on. Efficiency as in the difficulty of the domain, because essentially the higher the difficulty of the domain, the larger the amount of drops, and the power it consumes from you every single time doesn't change. But if you're struggling to clear content and you want your characters to be stronger, just level whatever relics you currently have. Just level the highest rarity of relics. A good tip is to level your handpiece as much as you need if you feel like you lack damage with your characters. And if you're dying a lot, start off by leveling your headpiece. After you've done that, if you need more damage, level up attack % main stat pieces. For every main damage dealer except Blade, as of the time of recording this video, Blade wants HP %. And if you're still dying after leveling your headpiece, level up HP % and defense % main stat pieces as much as you want. It's fine to level these lower tier relics right now because at the end of the day, you can just feed them into your 5-star relics later on when you get them. And then once you get to a Trailblaze level where you want to start farming 5-star relics, go for the main stats and level them as much as possible, starting from your damage dealer character and then your supports. Although you kind of want to do them somewhat equally as well. And don't worry about substats right away, because at the end of the day, it's better to just get value out of them right now, and then if you get better pieces down the line, you can just feed your current pieces into them. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that, and I think it's a fantastic way to play. Don't stress too much about relics, just level them. That's all I wanted to say. If you skip to this part through the timestamp, thanks for watching, and maybe come back when you're higher Trailblaze level and you can understand more of this entire video. But otherwise, yeah, hope that helped. Okay, I keep forgetting to say this, but this is regarding the self-modeling resin. I feel like people overhype its importance. Yes, it's really strong, but honestly, just feel free to use it on whatever piece you feel like you need, if the alternative is it sitting in your inventory and just collecting dust. There are most quote-unquote efficient pieces to use it on though. If you want any pointers with that, I would suggest using the self-modeling resin for crit rate or crit damage body, speed boots, any elemental damage bonus orb, or energy regeneration rope. Do not use it on gloves and headpiece at all if you can help it. This is just because these are the stats that have the lowest drop rate in the game for main stats, with energy regeneration rope being the lowest drop rate out of all of these. But seriously, just use it. You don't have to save it for any special occasion or whatever. I feel like, yeah, it's once again, maybe a bit overrated by people. Man, all of this did take really long to make, but I think that's everything. You maybe noticed the brightness of the room changing from scene to scene sometimes. That's because it took a few days to film this whole thing. I will admit I can definitely improve on my summarizing skills. However, honestly, this is the best I can do for now, and if you sat through the whole video, thank you so much for putting up with it. It's crazy to think that there are 100 of you subscribed now after the previous video. I'm so glad that the message resonated with you and that it seemed to help some of you out. Thanks for sharing all your thoughts in the comments. Even though I don't reply to all of them, I did read them all, and your nice words and kind encouragement means a lot. My next video will probably be shorter. I don't think I can top 1 hour, honestly. Maybe we'll do something more fun. Also, if you have any other suggestions on what you want to see next, Do let me know in the comment section below. Seemed like a lot of you wanted this video and this is the video. Before we go, I'd like to let you know that I do stream on Twitch. Feel free to come say hi. I plan to do some account reviews soon. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're keeping well. I hope you enjoyed this video. Really, seriously, 1 hour? If you sat through the whole thing, you're a real MVP. Take care. Stay safe. Much love. Bye-bye.